Salutations, Legion of Doom. Welcome to Podcast The Storm, where social awkward outcast, crazy riddles, and all around nerds convene to talk and debate all things pop culture. With me, as always, is my co-host, the Nerdy Occultist, aka the Authenticator, Dalton L. Mortimer.
Hello and good evening, everyone. Fortunately, midsummer
I'm
is
your
over
host,
and winter is slowly but surely on its way again. Yay.
and I'm your host, last time will want to be the Brainstorm Pop Culture. How's everyone doing tonight?
I am doing okay. It's been ridiculously hot for the last week or so. That's been annoying.
Yeah, it's called summer, dude.
Yeah. And midsummer was this week as well, which always makes me feel lame. But it's over now, which means we're slowly but surely ticking in the opposite direction again. Yay.
Right. Okay, so, well, kind of a big announcement, because this is going to be kind of a change up in our schedule within the next few weeks. So not going to get too far into it, but I have recently gotten a job that is first shift. So yeah, I'm waking up pretty early to do manual labor and shit. So we are going to, again, it's going to be a gradual process, and I'm also going to put a reminder within our Discord as well after the show, and another one next week as well. And the week after that, we will start doing our podcast episodes on Saturday, so we do not have to worry about time.
Mm-hmm.
This is mainly for Dalton's benefit, because I know he is not. Because the original idea was to move the podcast earlier, and I know Dalton is not an early riser, so
No, I am not.
yeah.
We moved it a day ahead.
So yeah,
instead.
Yeah. So within 2 weeks, either the second or third week of July, we will start doing. Second or third week of July, we will start doing. We will just switch to Saturdays, same time, like before.
It would be the second week of July.
Okay, yeah.
Because the third week of July would be the 17th through the 24th or something. And I know because that's the week of my birthday or thereabouts. So.
Oh yeah, I forget. I forget your birthday sometimes is in July. I sometimes forget that it's in July.
July 25th is my birthday.
Right. Okay. So yeah, most hopefully within the second week of July, we will have moved it to Saturday.
Also, speaking of my birthday, I might be busy that week, so we might have to think about moving the podcasts anyway. But I'll keep you posted as it gets closer.
Okay.
But I have I have stuff going on that week because it will be my birthday, and me and my friend are doing
Alright.
something to celebrate it. But that's neither here nor there.
Alright.
Like I said, shouldn't be a problem, but I'll keep you posted anyway.
Okay, so yeah, just so everyone's aware, and again, I will be posting within the few weeks, within the few weeks that reminders in the Discord that we will be moving it to Saturdays, same time, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Yep.
So we don't have a lot to talk about this week. Because I wanted to keep it short, just given the fact I do have to go to bed early.
Because somebody requested that you start getting up at fuck you o'clock in the morning.
I need money.
Yeah.
So yeah,
but
I'm gonna do whatever.
There are 2 other shifts they could have put you on. Is the thing.
There was literally nothing else. It was only this one.
Well, that still sucks. My condolences for you having to get up at fuck you o'clock in the morning.
You go to bed at fuck you o'clock in the morning.
Yes, because that is a sensible thing to be doing at that time. Getting up then is not a sensible
It really isn't.
to be doing at that time.
Anyway, so this is from slashfilm.com. This is something I had sent. Creature Commandos preview shows some downsides to James Gunn's DC Universe. Annecy? Annecy. I don't know what that means. It's written by Raphael Montemayor, published June 15th, 2024.
I'm just gonna say it. It's not like James Gunn's DC Universe needed any more downsides, considering that it seems like either Warner Brothers' bureaucratic bullshit or the creative incompetence seems to present plenty enough downsides to the potential new DC Universe. But oh well.
Okay.
Moving on.
The hierarchy of power in the DC universe is about to change again. DC Studios co-CEOs James Gunn and Peter Safran are hitting the big reset button, Warner Brothers' second favorite button after the delete button. While we wait for Superman to kick in a new era of live-action DC heroes, the new universe is actually starting this year, not on the big screen but on TV, with Creature Commandos, based on the comic book team of the same introduced in Weird War Tales in 1980 by J.M. DeMatteis and Pat Broderick. The original comic was set in World War II, following a team of weird superhuman monsters and pulpy stories. Wait, 1980? Really? I thought it was in the 40s they made that.
No. It was always a throwback.
Huh. The Creature Commandos TV show will be set in the new DC universe directly after the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker. The original team had a Universal Classic Monsters lineup that included a werewolf, a vampire, Frankenstein's monster, and a Gorgon. Well, that's not exactly Universal Classic, but okay. This new ragtag group of monsters includes Weasel, last seen in Gunn's Suicide Squad, Era Frankenstein, no monster, just Frankenstein, the Bride, a vampire, Nina Mazursky, a creature from the Black Lagoon type monster, G.I. Robot, and Dr. Phosphorus, a fiery radiated skeleton. They are led by Rick Flag Sr. At the Annecy Animation Film Festival, audiences got a chance to preview the development of the series, the evolution of character designs and backgrounds, as well as a couple of short animatics. Oh God, I would love to have seen those. As interesting and fun as the show looks, however, the panel focused on how this show fits the larger plan for Gunn's universe and vertical integration of DC Universe through a tremendously boring video message by Gunn about connecting all aspects of DC, which felt less like a festival panel and more like an earnings call. Okay,
Well,
yeah, I think we did talk about that when we saw the. I was just going to mention when we first talked about
yeah.
the original announcement like a year ago, it lacked a flair. It lacked a style or anything. It was just literally just a video of James Gunn talking.
Well, because unfortunately, no matter how much freedom they decide to give James Gunn and Peter Safran, they're still ultimately answerable to the same kind of suits that seem to want to shoot DC in its foot every 5 fucking minutes. And unfortunately, like I've been fairly consistent about this criticism I have of this, which is James Gunn works best as an outsider maverick. But unfortunately, now he's in the position where he kind of has to play the Kevin Feige-esque puppet master role, and it doesn't seem like it really suits him. So you wind up with a very on a leash, very neutered James Gunn, which often seems to remove a lot of the things we like about James Gunn, and therefore a lot of the pieces don't seem to fit together. Now, I want to be on record as saying I hope I'm wrong. I hope that it does all come together by 2025, and I'm sitting here eating crow in 2025. But I wouldn't put money on it at this point. Moving forward, though.
Hmm. Hello, Giant Turtle. Good to see you. I'm doing rather well. Um, I'd recommend checking the first like 5-10 minutes before you popped on here because there was an announcement, and I'll mention it again towards the end of the stream and be posting a thing in Discord too later. So
Mm-hmm.
um, anyway, how are you? Before I forget to ask that. Okay, so article. Creature Commandos are a ragtag group of weirdos. Okay.
Yes, that's fair
The
enough.
good news is that the Creature Commandos looks a lot of fun and like a classic James Gunn story. You have a lovable group of ugly idiots, wacky and bloody adventures, and a huge amount of heart underneath. The footage shown included a stylish fight between Phosphorus and Flag Senior that showcased the French animation studio Bobby Pills, with the radioactive burning skeleton full of emotion, which he has zero ability to express physically,
Interesting.
as well as elaborate fight choreography. The short scene shown involved Mazursky and the Nazi-killing enthusiast GI robot, who can only talk about his burning desire to annihilate Nazis, promising more of the irreverent humor that James Gunn excels at.
Please, for the love of all that is reasonable and holy, Mr. Gunn, do not allow this to become modern satire, because the overuse of the term Nazi is going to tank you before you've even got started if you are not careful. The word Nazi needs to apply to only the mid-century Germans, please. Don't the boys it, for the love of
Okay.
God.
Sorry, I'm looking up Bobby Pill's animation real quick. Uh, looks like they worked on some stuff. Uh, okay, animation studio in Paris, full of depressive. Like this is actually the description for it. Hold on. Just curious how they got that name, Bob Pills.
I'm curious why their name isn't some pretentious French fucking thing. The French usually are very, very keen about taking ownership of, well, basically everything in their borders. So
Okay, so Bobby Pills animation. Okay, yeah. Here's the description of the studio. An animation studio in Paris full of depressive, beautiful, fucked up people making cartoons for depressive, beautiful, fucked up people.
so Frenchmen making stuff for Frenchmen. But I'm Tish.
Also, you.
Well, okay, yes, fair enough. But I own it.
Um,
I don't use it as a fuel for nationalist fervor for the last 200 years like the French do.
okay, I'm looking at their works. Nothing besides like one thing. That Captain Laserhawk show on Netflix. You know that like all the Ubisoft video game properties like interconnected and stuff. That's about it.
Mm.
Anyway,
I'm not really anal retentive about them being like new to the animation game, really. I mean, as long as they're headquartered in France, they're not going to be hyper Californian, so I suppose that is a good thing.
yeah. All right. Okay. Giant Turtle. Guns pitch check for Creature Commandos, dated 2022, included references to Universal Classic Monsters and the incredible manga series Golgo 13 as influences. Okay, I'm going to look up Golgo 13. So now I'm curious.
That's an interesting poll. I wasn't expecting that. Interesting.
A tone described as dark, humorous, but never goofy and unsentimental. And a story as an adult themed show with political storylines, much like Peacemaker, Creature Commandos will go in an unusual direction with its theme song, the pitch deck named iconic Venezuelan song Maliendo Cafe.
I'm a little bit worried about the insertion of political there because of the aforementioned please for the love of God keep Nazi referring to the people who are actually Nazis and not just people in the current zeitgeist that you don't like, please.
I mean, to be fair, Peacemaker had some stuff in there and it worked. So
I mean, okay, but again, I'm sick of being pulled out of shows by, oh, by the way, you, the viewer, are a Nazi every 5 fucking minutes.
yeah, that's not what it did. Peacemaker did not do that at all.
I know. It's just with the character who's constantly whining about how much he wants to kill Nazis. I could see this very easily turning into a herder, therefore screw you alt right type nonsense, and just.
Or you're just, or no offense, Dom, but maybe you're just so used to seeing that bullshit that you can't see anything else.
I mean, it's. But again, in a modern because here's the thing. According to the description so far, it's not actually set during the Second World War. It's set during the time just after James Gunn's Suicide Squad movie and Peacemaker. So
Which would be
why would a Nazi killing obsessed robot still be whining about Nazis in presumably 2024?
Couple things, Dom. One, DC Universe timeless. Two, there are actual there's time traveling Nazis with per decaton.
Right, but still, between that and political being referenced just now, I'm just
gonna say, maybe hold your criticism until actually seeing the show.
I'm not calling it a criticism yet. I'm just really, really imploring James Gunn, if he ever sees this, avoid making the modern Nazi jokes, please. I'm begging.
So, okay. So, Golgo, I'm going to butcher this, obviously, because I have no idea how to pronounce it. Golgo 13. It's a series, a manga series that was published in like since October 1968, about a professional assassin for hire.
Mm-hmm. Was also a video game at one point.
Also, movies.
Mm-hmm.
Never guessed the main character's name, though.
Mm.
Dave McCartney.
Mm.
It's weird how they do that. Anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, and this isn't really a criticism, it's just like I'm kind of sick of. I know it's James Gunn thing to use like songs and stuff, and he uses them well. You know, they're never just put in there to be put in there, right?
But a lot of
But I
people
would
who
like.
rip him off have kind of ruined that aesthetic.
No, I'm not. I wasn't gonna say that. I would just like some original fucking scores.
I mean, I'll co-sign that and add memorable original scores, please. Hummable original scores, please.
That was. I would assume that was
Mimetic
implied.
original scores, please. Well, this is the problem. In modern day Hollywood, you either get the score being reference music, like James Gunn likes to do, or you get the most generic, unmemorable, unhummable, untunable themes you possibly could get. Like the most unmusical music you could possibly get, and it's really freaking annoying. But people cream themselves over it because it's at least an original score, and it's like, no, if your theme song or your score isn't hummable and memeable and a tune that can actually be stuck in your head, then you failed. That's like the basic threshold for me as to whether something has a good theme song or score or not.
All right. Creatures look unique and memorable. I'm gonna butcher this. Yves Balak, who helmed the animated series Captain Laserhawk, and works as supervising director here, talked through elements of the design process, like wanting the bride to have 4 arms, before deciding not to torture the animators. We're stupid, but not that stupid, said Warner Brothers Animation VP Peter Girardi. Dr. Phosphorus was a struggle because the team couldn't decide if they wanted the skeleton to morph and change to express things, but they only decided that his blank expression was part of the character, with everyone else being forced to interpret his intentions. Okay?
I mean, that's making a limitation into a creative choice. That's a good habit to get into.
Mm-hmm. Well, DC preview highlighted the problem with synergy. Okay, hold on. While the show itself has the makings of an entertaining James Gunn joint, the excitement of this preview was somewhat diminished by the clear limitations set by Gunn's mandate for streamlining and having a single continuity across the DC universe. We've barely had a fucking continuity at all. So why the fuck is that a problem?
Yeah, and as far as streamlining goes, there's an awful lot of disparate moving pieces for there to be streamlining going, James. I mean, for fuck's sake,
Right.
you're starting with an animated series based on Universal movie monsters, which is weird in the way that I like, but it's not exactly a streamlined approach to the universe either, is it?
Um, as we predicted, voice cast in these new DC animated projects are being dominated by celebrities, with the Creature Commandos including the likes of Frank Grillo, David Harbour, Viola Davis, and Idara Verma. Even the character designs are forced to be practical and simple enough to translate to live action, limiting creativity. No. One thing I respect that they're willing to have. I would be interested because one thing, DC has done this before, like Vixen for the CW verse.
Yeah.
Started out as an animated series, and then the voice actress got to play the live action counterpart. So it's not unusual. It's nothing new, and
if anything, that what little limitations that does bring will be a catalyst for creative decision making, which is good. Potentially, anyway. There's always the not inconsiderable possibility that they'll fuck it up because this is Warner Brothers and they like shooting DC in the head every chance they get. But assuming that Warner Brothers can stop sabotaging themselves for 5 fucking minutes, this could be a good thing. Anyway, moving on.
Yeah. Also, I mean, to be fair, the celebrities, which don't get me wrong, sometimes having celebrity voices, I can understand being a problem because more often than not, you'll be able to hear the voice more as a celebrity than the character they're playing. But given Frank Grillo, David Harbour, Viola Davis, and the other people that are playing, like Alan Tudyk, I mean, that guy always did voices even before he got, he's a character actor.
Yeah,
right?
my only issue is I genuinely believe they should have recasted Amanda Waller. I feel like keeping Viola Davis around is too close of a tie to the pre-existing DC universe, and she was never really that great in the role anyway. So I would have recast Amanda Waller. But that's not really Viola Davis's fault. That's just DC once again being repeatedly shot in the head by Warner Brothers because Warner Brothers has no faith in their freaking IP.
I think she was pretty good as Amanda Waller, to be honest.
I resent her slightly for not physically getting into the role, i.e., not putting on weight or even being willing to wear a fat suit for the role.
But besides that, I think she played the character well.
I don't think she was ever really allowed to. Is the problem because the writing was never good for her. Like the writing for the character Amanda Waller was never really good.
Well, I would argue that the Suicide Squad, James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, did better. I will agree. Yes, Suicide Squad fumbled every character. Let's be fully honest on that.
There's not a single thing in Suicide Squad 1 that was not fumbled. Suicide Squad 2 was much, much, much better. I'm just saying that both for the sake of we haven't really seen much in the way of Amanda Waller from Viola Davis, and also for reasons of letting the changing of the guard actually be a clean break, I would have recast Amanda Waller.
All right. But also the design, like the actual image we had seen of the Creature Commandos, the designs don't look that simple. I mean, and to be fair, animation, you always try to keep simple designs. You can't overcomplicate it because, it's for an animation. It's for animation purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're doing 3D animation, then that's a whole different ballpark, obviously.
Yeah, but okay. Other than, again, my obvious quibble that they should have recast Amanda Waller, I don't really have any problems with the voice cast, especially given that they're supposed to cross over into live action. And while I would prefer voice actors play voice roles, with the conceit of this needs to be a universe, and therefore the line between animation and live action needs to be as blurred as possible, you can't really have voice actors play characters in live action because not many voice actors can actually carry over into live action in that way. Whereas it's easier to start with actors who are at least serviceable as voice actors and then can play them in live action. Anyway, moving on.
Mm-hmm. There was palpable disappointment in both the audience and the panelists who worked on the show while discussing the background art. The team recalled redesigning the Belle Reve prison that houses DC monsters and villains for the show, showing a beautiful gothic locale on top of a hill, a very comic booky place. So James Gunn called and said no, they had to match the Belle Reve scene in the Suicide Squad. Okay, yeah, no, that kind of sucks.
And see, this is the thing I was saying about because we've danced this tragic roundabout at least a couple times before, but to say again what we've been saying for a long time, DC needs to decide, are they doing a hard reboot or are they doing a soft reboot? Because they can't have it both ways. You can't simultaneously clear out all of the Snyder baggage and do a soft enough reboot you can keep Gunn's Suicide Squad, Peacemaker, and Viola Davis as Amanda Waller, not to mention the fact that that links you to the lame-ass Belle Reve that we got in the first Suicide Squad. So, like, this is why it would have been smarter to go full hard reboot if you're actually doing a reboot. Especially considering that they kind of already did a soft reboot in the post-Snyderverse era of DC, that if they had just been smart enough to keep going, they could have built something out of. But they weren't smart enough to keep going, and so now we're stuck in this middle pillar where it's too hard to be a soft reboot, but it's not hard enough to be a hard reboot. It's a confused clusterfuck that is trying to balance 5 different kinds of loyalties to 5 different versions of DC. And meanwhile, Warner Brothers has no clue whatsoever what they're doing because they never have, it seems, with their IPs that aren't Batman or Superman. Anyway, moving on again. Brainstormer. Did we lose you? I do.
I'm here.
Okay.
Sorry, I muted myself real quick. I was eating something. I didn't want to make noise.
Okay.
All right. But yeah, no, I just kind of finish off the thing of like, yeah, it does kind of suck because, I think you and I both agree, like, comic booky is always better, especially when you're working in anime.
Wait, well, just period. Like, again.
Okay, yeah, okay, fair enough.
But yeah, when you're adapting comic books, especially superhero comic books, they should be bloody comic booky, goddammit. And this attempt to comic book shit just is a bad idea all around, and it pisses the people who care about the source material off.
Here's a weird thing. We never see the actual exterior, or not the full exterior. Like, we never see an above shot of Belle Reve. We see, like, courtyards and stuff of it, which it looks somewhat fantastical, like in the Suicide Squad movie, right?
This is true. They could easily they could easily play the plausible deniability game and go with the cooler design anyway. But
yeah.
But I guess they decided not to.
Plus, if it's a prison, and I'm not going to say every prison, it's going to sound weird, but pictures of prisons I have seen, and granted, I've mostly seen them from like TV and shit, and there are some like old prisons out there, even abandoned ones, right?
the Alcatrazes, the like new gates, etc.
They're always there's always a style to it in some form or fashion. Obviously, it's meant to look very oppressive, very closed in, tight, like tight corridors, very like
Especially when it's a high security prison, which a superpowered prison would be by definition.
yeah. So it's a weird dichotomy that they want to make up. As it's said here, the next slide in the presentation showed a dull, boring building you can mistake for an office.
Which again, I chalk this more up to the failure to decide whether you're doing a soft reboot or a hard reboot, honestly. Because on the one hand, you probably should have done the softest reboot possible and just kept going with the Black Adam timeline. But since you decided not to do that, since you decided not to soft reboot, you're better off going in the complete other direction and doing as hard a reboot as you possibly can. But instead, they kind of tried to have their cake and eat it too, and now the cake is crumbling on the carpet, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, last paragraph here. Granted, there are other locales that look fantastic, like Frankenstein's mansion being a creepy gothic palace. Still, the focus on making it part of a cohesive story, one that works within the constraints of live action, seems counterintuitive to the very idea of making a TV show in animation. Sure, it looks cool that Rick Flag Sr. looks a lot like Frank Grillo, that David Harbour is playing Frankenstein in a movie. Apparently, some, if not all, of these characters have ties to the upcoming Superman. But is it worth it if we lose the discovery of, say, the next Kevin Conroy?
See, I agree, but on the complete opposite end. Why are we accepting that live action should look dull and banal and stupid in the first place? I don't need animation to be fantastical. I need live action to catch up to animation within its capacity to be fantastical. Just because you're going to live actionize something doesn't mean you have to make it boring. Just make your live action segments more visually interesting to coincide with the animation, God damn it. In a world before CGI, that might have been a big ask or a very hard stylistic choice to pull off. But in a world where CGI is one of the most used tools in fucking Hollywood, why are we acting like we can't bring at least some of the stylization from animation into a live action setting? God damn it. Anyway, moving on.
All right. There's some don't sent.
Mm-hmm.
So this is from inverse.com. The Acolyte isn't ruining Star Wars, you are. As written by Levi Scott, published June 9th, 2024.
Mm-hmm. As usual, sweet journalist fuck. You are not the arbitrator of what is good or worthwhile or worth caring about in Star Wars. That is very much the prerogative of the goddamn audience to do, and you don't get to morally shame them for making those preferences known. Deal with it. Moving on. I assume Brainstormer is still eating.
Yeah, sorry, one sec. Dealing with something real quick.
Yep. Do 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 do. Sorry, elevator music, literal elevator music, for the sake of waiting for Brainstormer to come back. What? I'm gonna make you wish that I'd stayed to know when I'm done. Your status quo will know its race is over. Oh, this will be fun.
It can very well try, Giant Turtle, but I'm the only one who knows the password to this thing. Anyway, yeah, sorry, I had to help out with something real quick. So
Yep. But moving
okay.
forward,
Subheader is Lucasfilm's latest series is the franchise's most promising yet, but fans are too blinded by their hate to see it.
it's not promising. It in fact is a masterclass in how not to write a science fiction series, let alone a Star Wars show, frankly. And no, not because of Mo witches and how everyone seems to be baffled by the inclusion of witches in Star Wars, because they've always been a thing, as well as Sith sorcery has been a thing for pretty much since the original trilogy came out and shit. Because, I am the guy who will, almost universally defend magic being included in everything. The issue is that you didn't use the characters whose powers in that sphere had already been established. You didn't use the Night Sisters or any of the other witches of Dathomir, let alone that they had already been kind of ruined in Ahsoka, but never mind. You made up this new coven completely unrelated to any of the witches of Dathomir or Sith sorcery in general, and then you made them cringy as fuck. And you literally pivoted everything on an evil twin plot, and you created the potential for a murder mystery that was immediately resolved basically in episode 1.
I mean, what could have been interesting is they took a page out of I don't know if anyone knows this show, but Columbo. It was an old TV detective show, I think in the 60s, 70s.
Yes. Which raises the question, who the fuck doesn't know about Columbo at this point? At least, even if it's just by cultural osmosis.
Well, I just full honesty, never did until like a year or so ago, where I just randomly stumbled upon a video on YouTube and I watched it and I was enthralled because, well, the charisma of Columbo. But
my friend, I love you, but you are sheltered as fuck.
It was way before my time, and I never saw reruns of it on anything I watched growing up.
Which returns me to my statement of you were sheltered as fuck.
But I remember watching a video essay that talked about like the behind the scenes process of creating the show and like the writing of it, which was obviously about. Okay. But the whole idea of a murder mystery to turn on the head, where like you're more at the perspective of the killer, and it's more of less of a whodunit and how to catch them.
Yeah, the classic. We the audience know who did it because of dramatic irony. It's just a matter of getting from point A to B.
Yeah, and
which in theory, yes, I suppose that's what they were kind of trying to go for. They didn't. I'm not succeed, saying
though. I'm just saying, like, maybe that could have been what they went with, and it could have been a lot more interesting. But the thing is, with like how to catch them, I think it's a lot. You have to write it a lot smarter than a whodunit.
Well, that, but also you actually have to have, because one of the many geniuses of Columbo as a show was that even if the killer was only involved in one episode, we still had a reason to either like them or fear them or find them repulsive, or like Columbo was very good at getting the audience invested in the case per episode, even if we would only see a killer or killers in that one episode. This show is basically revolving around one single crime, and yet it still hasn't managed in 3 or 4 episodes at this point to make the killer, i.e. the evil twin character, likable or interesting, or make any of the characters looking for the evil twin character likable or interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason one of them is vaguely memorable is because it's the guy who did Squid Game, and he's a good actor even though he's not given good material.
Anyway.
Which, I mean, kudos to him for learning English just to play in a Star Wars show, but shit. I really wish he had had better material to work with.
Alright, so no one hates Star Wars more than those who claim to be Star Wars fans. Sure, the past few years have given the fandom plenty to critique. The sequels splintered the fan base beyond recognition, and Lucasfilm's efforts to expand the galaxy on the small screen have been mixed at best.
Yes, and in some fucking idiot, exactly. Sorry.
And in some cases, criticism is inevitable. Not everyone will find something to like in the franchise's recent output. At a certain point, though, the discourse reaches a fever pitch, and even Lucasfilm's most promising projects are swept up in the drama.
Because, my dear, the people who love a franchise the most are correspondingly the people the most invested in that franchise. And the people the most invested in that franchise, both emotionally and intellectually, are the people who know what that franchise is or should be. And if you fail to attempt over and over and over again what the franchise should be according to those most invested in it, they will get pissed. Especially when a large percentage of those currently in control of stewarding that franchise actively despise both the fandom and the concept of fandom in general. The phrase used to be the customer is always right. The phrase basically now has turned into the customer is always not just wrong but also immoral usually. And you can't very easily tell people using their own favorite thing that they are horrible subhuman monsters over and over again and not expect to get any backlash from that. Because the more we care about something, the more inclined we are to become invested in it, and the more invested in it we become, the more likely we are to rage when we see it being misused, abused, or weaponized against us. Do you see?
Mhm.
Moving on.
Moving on. The Acolyte is not the first Star Wars project to face the brunt of fan backlash, and it likely won't be the last. But the new live action series is also one of the best additions to the galaxy far away, and to best additions to that galaxy far away in a long time, embracing decades of nostalgia while also thinking critically on the franchise's legacy. And
Allow,
also,
allow me
hold
allow
on.
me to now channel the J. Jonah Jameson meme.
Okay.
Sorry.
So no, it's just I wanted you just for your full, so you have the full context of the whole paragraph. It also might be the most diverse Star Wars story yet, and while that's definitely a boon for marginalized fans, it's made the Acolyte the target of a vocal splinter of the fandom. Okay, hi, marginalized fan here. I hate saying that. I'll be fully honest. Was not interested in the Acolyte, nor have I been interested in Star Wars stuff for a few years now. Just because of everything that's going on,
Mm-hmm.
either with the
Yeah.
actual like projects or the whole discourse stuff. Just because I don't really want to get part of that drama.
Yeah. I am gay, physically disabled, and of a religious minority. He is mixed race and an inner city lower middle class person, and neither one of us feel particularly represented or seen by any of this bullshit. First and foremost, because it makes no sense to talk about marginalization and diversity in a franchise that literally, like, 2/3 of its characters are non-human characters. Like, for all of the slings and arrows of marginalization and diversity, you can't really make that argument when never mind inter-species diversity. This series, like many sci-fi franchises, has extra species diversity, meaning there are aliens and different species of every different kind. Not to mention the like Eldridge type characters like Aboleth or the ones of Mortis or the Bendu sages or the Wills or like there's so many layers of actual diversity in Star Wars that have nothing to do with demographic bullshit, and yet you are hyperfixating on demographic bullshit for political, identitarian, and moralistic reasons. Political, identitarian, and moralistic reasons that have nothing to do with Star Wars or why anyone who has ever enjoyed it enjoy it. But by the way, Star Wars has always been checking more boxes as far as demographics go than than quite a lot of franchises. Lando, black. Leia was probably a lot of people's favorite character in the original trilogy, and she was also a badass, take no shit woman. Like, even if you want to you want to do the social justice equivalent of phrenology and see how many demographic boxes this checks, Star Wars already was kicking ass and taking names on that front 50 freaking years ago almost. But it's not good enough because you have ideological presuppositions that you also have to throw in here. And it's fucking bullshit.
Moving on.
Yep, moving on.
All right. Whether you know them as the Fandom Menace or a cluster of blue checkmark users on Twitter, it's impossible to escape their orbit. The same folks that review bomb diverse swings like Marvel's Eternals and the Lord of the Rings prequel, The Rings of Power, have now set their sights on The Acolyte. Hear them tell it this series is the worst thing that's ever happened to Star Wars, and its showrunner, Leslie Headland, is just as fiendish as Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy. Okay, so just to cover what we had actually talked about this last week. We specifically both of us, given what we read of her interview. And stuff.
We covered her last week, and I ended up I went in thinking that she might be another Kathleen Kennedy, and you can check me on this if you feel like I'm lying. As of last week, when we got finished reading that article, I was under the assumption that she genuinely was a fan and was actually sabotaged by the corporate and executive meddling of Kathleen Kennedy. So I hold nothing personal against Leslie Headland at all. I think she was sabotaged by Darth Kennedy the incompetent over there. But that's neither here nor there. Rings of Power is bullshit because it literally goes out of its way to piss on the legacy of everything Tolkien intended Lord of the Rings to be. And Marvel's The Eternals was a great erect middle finger in the face of one of Jack Kirby's most bizarre and over-the-top and pulpy sci-fi franchises in his entire bibliography, which they instead turned into a lazy rehash of a rehash of a rehash of Christopher Nolan because they wanted to turn the Eternals from a pulpy, over-the-top cosmic sci-fi genre into a
Oscar bait film?
Grounded Oscar bait type sci-fi film where no one raises their voice over 1 decibel and removed all of the color and cosmic shit. So yeah, no, the reason people don't like the way those IPs were handled has very little, if anything, to do with you just hate the gays, hate the browns, hate the various people of different demographics and shite, and everything to do with the fact that you use these IPs as a political weapon and use those people of different demographics as human goddamn shields instead of actually trying to provide them with an interesting or compelling story, let alone being loyal or grateful to the original ethos of the IP. And again, the people who are more likely to be fans of something are also the people most likely to be invested in that thing. And the people most likely to be invested in something, both emotionally and intellectually, are also the people to be the most hypercritical of something when it goes wrong and goes out of its way to spite them or its original ethos. It's really not that complicated. Because again, back in the old days, the adage was the customer is always right. And in the modern era, it very much seems a lot of the time like the adage has changed from the customer is always right to the customer is not just wrong, but also immoral. And people get sick of being called subhuman immoral monsters for simply wanting their IPs to be handled correctly. Moving on.
All right. To them, the Acolyte's woke agenda is something to be feared. It's ruining Star Wars. It's poisoning pop culture itself. It needs to be stopped by any means necessary.
Feared, no. Loathed and critiqued to Hell and Back, yes. And it's ruining pretty much every major sci-fi or fantasy or genre-based IP you care to name that isn't like an original IP that came out 5 minutes ago. To the point that like Has Been Hotel is literally the only new IP that I can justify myself getting invested in because it's not being slowly corrupted from the outside in.
You realize how ridiculous all that sounds, right? God, I hope so. But if not, let's try this. The Acolyte is not actually ruining Star Wars, but the bigoted backlash is definitely ruining the fun for everyone else. No, it is not. Well, okay. I will say the backlash is not bigoted, and it's not the. I will say the Acolyte is more a symptom of what's ruining Star Wars than anything.
Frankly, what's ruining Star Wars has very little, if anything, to do with demographics. If these characters were as well developed as people like Lando and Leia were in the original trilogy, or people like, what's her name? The Jedi Master who lost an eye fighting General Grievous. I forget her name. But regardless, if these crop of diverse characters were treated as importantly and as reverently and as well-roundedly as all the other diverse characters in Star Wars, nobody would bat an eye and would have accepted them full stop. But the problem is these characters are not allowed to be well-rounded characters because they have to be ideological stand-ins instead. For example, for as much as people gave the Acolyte shit for a lesbian witch cult, nobody minded when the Night Sisters were introduced. In fact, a lot of people, myself included, really, really fucking love both the Night Sisters specifically and the Planet of the Witches Dathomir in general. Because, again, I'm the guy who likes magic and fucking everything. But that's neither here nor there. But the Night Sisters were also heavily implied to be lesbian in nature because they're an all-female witch cult. And nobody minded because the Night Sisters were well written, weren't meant to be ideological stand-ins for anything, and actually broadened not just the scope of Star Wars, but also the depth of the mythos as well. The cult of the thread there on Jakku, I believe, or no, not Jakku, Bardock, I believe. Okay, but yeah, the cult of the thread on Jakku or Bardock, has not successfully managed to do that because their magic system is not well thought out. They have no deeper mythos, or at least none has been evidenced. They were poorly acted, and their rituals, unlike the Night Sisters rituals, which were almost always creepy in a sort of shamanic voodoo sort of way, and very engaging in a similar way, and their magical ichor, which gave them specific powers that were unique to them, were all interesting and actually felt like they added something to the mythos. But the Cult of the Thread has added very, very little, if nothing, and has instead torn down many, many pre-existing things rather than expanding the universe in a new and interesting direction because of ideological reasoning, do you see?
Moving on?
Yep, moving on.
It's not outright shocking to see something like The Acolyte marred by racist, misogynistic, and even anti-LGBTQ backlash. That Star Wars devotees would share multiple bad faith treatises about the series on YouTube or tank its audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is just par of the course at this point. This, after all, the same fandom that launched consistent attacks against actors like John Boyega, Kelly Marie Tran, and Daisy Ridley. Not really, no.
Yeah, no, they didn't. They disliked Kelly Marie Tran's character, and quite frankly, most people I remember speaking to, myself included, wound up with the distinct impression that rather than Rey being the main character of Star Wars, it should have been Finn all along, or at least that the three of them, Finn, Poe, and Rey, should have had more equal screen time, like the original trilogy's Scooby Gang did.
The same fandom that were publicly admonished by Ewan McGregor himself when Obi-Wan Kenobi faced similar pushback.
Okay, just because Ewan McGregor says something does not mean that he is more correct than the people who disagree with him, or that we should be somehow more shamed than we otherwise would be. Because Ewan, for all intents and purposes, is a doll for the writers and directors of the Star Wars franchise to play with. And that might be hurtful to some degree, Ewan, but yeah, nobody pays an actor for their deeper philosophical positions, Ewan. They pay an actor because an actor is good at acting, at least in theory. So you don't really have any authority over us simply because you play a character we happen to like. Especially when that character is being disserviced and you're not willing to say anything about it, or even acknowledge that it is happening in the first place.
The problem is that nothing has changed. In the 10 years since the vocal minority suddenly cried out about diverse casting and more nuanced storytelling. No nuanced storytelling. You guys have basically chopped that away.
Yeah, your storytelling is so overly simplistic that it takes characters who could or should have been three-dimensional and reduces them down to one-dimensional ideological cutouts. This is the problem with the weaponization of art as a means to an end rather than as an end in itself. When you use a piece of art to convey only what the author intends it to convey, and that usually relates to some kind of socio-political or moral gobbledygook, your characters are not allowed to be three-dimensional people that we can actually get invested in or find likable or relatable in some way on their own terms. They have to be ideological mouthpieces for the writers. They essentially have to be puppets with the author's hand up their ass. And those type of characters and the worlds in which they usually inhabit are not anywhere near as interesting as a world with 3 dimensions or more dimensions that can actually support multiple vectors for interpretation and analysis. Do you see? Which is what old IPs had in common that new examples of IP don't have in common. Moving on.
They've yet to actually learn their lesson. Their arguments are bleeding into even the casual discourse surrounding the Acolyte. Comments on set design and screenwriting have turned into misogynistic microaggressions against Headland. Even critiques on the series have been weaponized by its haters. There's no room for nuance when it comes to the Acolyte. You either stand with the series, flaws and all, or you're
Irrevocably is
Thank
the
you.
word.
Irrevocably against it.
Yeah, and does it not occur to you how silly and myopic and overly simplistic and two-dimensional that is? That you can't criticize it for all of the various quality problems it has because you have to believe that out there somewhere is this cartoonish cabal of mustache twirling Nazis who just are avatars of hate. You're essentially creating a situation where you imagine your interlocutors in a conversation to be evil, and then you use the fact that you project evil onto them as a reason to continue treating them as though they are evil. Did it ever occur to you that there are no Nazis around every corner waiting to say bad things? That there are no fascists waiting to make a comeback 70 fucking years later? There are no demons waiting on in every corner store to overthrow the societal order or whatever the fuck. The world is not a Bosch painting set to Wagner, my dear. You're dealing with other humans who have other perspectives than you, and you can't conceive of a world where people can have other perspectives from you and also be morally valid. That sounds very much to me like a you problem rather than a them problem. You can't just call people Nazis and fascists and every other demonizing name you can think of, and then act as though you're not the one being hateful by projecting literal cartoonish villainy onto people who simply disagree with you on shit.
Okay. So the origins of this toxicity aren't difficult to figure out. At the end of the day, it boils down to entitlement. Many male fans feel like they own the franchise and are determined to safeguard it from anyone that could challenge that ownership. That makes it
Okay.
hard to, hold on. That makes it hard for disparate groups to coexist, and it's even harder for any non-white, non-male creatives hoping to tell stories within the franchise.
Okay, my dear. Fuck you, because you're assuming that there are no women or people of color in the people who are criticizing you. Because you want to believe that, like I said, the world is suddenly a Bosch painting set to Wagner, where there are Nazis, fascists, and demons around every corner waiting to overthrow society or some shit. It's not the case. You need to go back the way you came and return to a high trust society, please. Because this presupposition that everyone who disagrees with me must be the worst possible cartoonishly evil person I can imagine in my head, in my wildest fever dreams, is the problem. Because if you argued with yourself, if you argued with the presupposition that everyone who disagrees with you must be the redneck version of a Nazi or some shit, you would realize that it is people of all walks of life and all demographics who disagree with not just you, but the ideology of social justice in general. Because whether you like it or not, the academic presupposition of given demographic identities is not the same as the individual people who occupy those identities. But the more you presage that only people of color and minorities and people of various sexual persuasions abide by this ideology, and no one who doesn't abide by this ideology could possibly be one of those, the more you are just going to project the cartoonishly mustache-twirling villainous Nazi image onto everyone who disagrees with you and morally invalidate them, so you don't have to cope with the fact that people who you would otherwise consider morally valid think you are wrong and have good reason to, because the show is shit. Moving on.
All right. What began as a relatively niche issue has become Lucasfilm's biggest hurdle moving forward. The Acolyte can weather the storm. After all, it's been well received by critics. But what about the fandom and its relationship to those guiding the franchise now? As the discourse spirals out of control, it's getting harder to ignore it outright. There's no easy way out, but something has to change. Otherwise, this vocal minority will end up ruining Star Wars for the rest of us.
Sweetheart, it's not a vocal minority. The Acolyte's ratings are justifiably shit because it is justifiably shit. And as a result, the fandom, the people most intellectually and emotionally invested in the goddamn show and in the goddamn franchise, are telling you that they do not like the content that is being served to them because they don't feel that it is respectful to either them or to the IP itself, to what Star Wars deserves. Same thing with all the other IPs that have of late come under this kind of fire. The reason why Doctor Who is failing is because it's not worthy of Doctor Who. The reason why Star Wars is failing is because it's not worthy of the legacy of Star Wars. The reason why Star Trek is failing is because it's not worthy of the legacy of Star Trek, etc., ad nauseum. But the more people strive to convey this to you, being as they are members of the audience and they are telling you what they don't like about the way you're handling the IP and how they would prefer you fix it, you are instead, rather than say the sensible thing, which is the customer is always right, we need to course correct, you keep morally grandstanding and saying anyone who dislikes this show or this version of this IP must be a subhuman immoral monster, and therefore you're inadmissible to the discussion. And you can only do that so many times with so many different people who are part of this audience before the audience just goes, okay, I've tried to explain to you why I don't like this show or this use of this IP and how I would like you to fix it, and your only response thus far has been to call me various flavors of an immoral monster. So I am just going to go and no longer engage with this IP because the people who are stewarding this IP self-evidently hate me and everything I used to love about this IP and are going to go out of their way to actively destroy it. And I don't want to watch something that I loved get ruined over and over and over again. And that is why it is not doing well with anyone but the critics, because the critics are fucking inculcated into this neo-Hegelian, postmodern infused art school mentality that says the only purpose of art has only ever been as a means to an end rather than an end in itself. And that the only thing that matters about art is shit like subtext and theme, and nothing about in-universe logic, characterization, three-dimensionality, world building, etc. matters. And when you start with that premise, the premise that the only thing that matters is my socio-political and moral theming and my subtext and my authorial intent, and nothing relating to the in-universe logic, characterization, or world building matter, then perforce the world building, the characterization, and the in-universe logic either get ignored or actively slighted, and as a result, the IP slowly crumbles. It's very, very simple. When you don't prioritize characterization, world building, or in-universe logic, characterization, in-universe logic, and world building inevitably take a back seat. And when the thing they take back seat to is my themes, my subtext, and my authorial intent, the only thing the IP will ever then become is a ego-stroking moral exercise. And nobody is under any obligation to sit there and listen to or watch a ego-stroking moralistic exercise of the artist's own ego. Especially when it's a pre-existing IP that they should be held responsible for how they steward. Moving on.
Okay. Again, this is some don't sent relating to the previous article we just read from Forbes.com. The Acolytes 15% audience scores embarrassing for the audience scorers. Written by Paul Tassi and published June 16th, 2024.
See, the problem with this title of yours is that you're blaming the people who are conveying that they're pissed off for being pissed off, rather than blaming the people who made the thing they're pissed off at for them being pissed off. Again, at the core of this whole rigmarole seems to be the issue of, at one point in the not so distant past, like I remember the 90s, I grew up in them, there was an adage that the customer is, at least in theory, always right. Now, though, thanks to a bunch of art school rigmarole from academia that has infiltrated Hollywood and the arts and education and politics and every other fucking vector you care to name, there is an adage that says the audience is not just wrong, but is in fact immoral. And you're surprised, or you appear to be surprised, that the audience does not take kindly to being treated like strawman Bosch demons or Nazis, when they are in fact no such thing. When you overuse the term Nazi, fascist, racist, sexist, etc., and you deflect any criticism with those accusations, with moral invalidation as opposed to addressing the arguments, eventually the audience is going to get very, very, very pissed, especially if you're supposed to be stewarding something that they previously did care about quite a lot. Moving on.
While Star Wars has had many controversies in the Disney era, viewers have now monopolized a fleet of TIE bombers to obliterate user scores of the Acolyte whenever possible, namely on Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb.
Here's the thing about this concept of review bombing of yours. Does it ever apply to the critics? For example, when Joker, one of the best comic book movies to come out in the last decade, and a damn good approximation of a classic Scorsese movie, winds up in the 60s, despite having one of Joaquin Phoenix's best performances, one of the most innovative production designs, and one of the most amazing movie scores in cinematic history, courtesy of Hilda Gutterdauer. Despite all of those amazing things and all the other amazing technical proficiencies of Joker, not to mention the fact that it's a pretty decent adaptation of at least the backstory portion of a Killing Joke filtered through the lens or the stylization of a King of Comedy. Despite all of that, it wound up in the 60s among the critics. Can we then conclude that the critics are review bombing it for ideological bias reasons? No. You almost never use the term review bombing to refer to the critics ever, because there is no way that the critics could ever be ideologically biased or predisposed against something that they otherwise would find compelling if they weren't so far up their own asses. But whenever the audience at large conveys to you in no uncertain terms that a IP that they like was horrifyingly mismanaged, the only excuse you can come up with is, but my review bombing her. And that's fine. But if review bombing is a thing, and we're allowed to use it as an explanation for shit, why does it never apply to the critics having an art school stick up their ass about every freaking piece of genre entertainment they come across, or at least the majority of them? Unless that genre entertainment is subverting itself somehow. Moving on.
Alright. I previously reported that this started up right at release, as The Acolyte quickly became the lowest audience rated Star Wars project besides the infamous holiday special. Now, its former 33% score has dipped below the special's 20% score and is all the way down to 15%. At a certain point, this is just absurd, and it says a lot more about the viewers than it does the quality of the show itself, which has barely even gotten started. Now, just 3 episodes.
No, it doesn't. Once again, when you remove the ideological bias from your head, the reason why it's lower than the holiday special is very, very obvious. Because for all of its many, and did I mention many, faults, the holiday special was bizarrely memeable and also charming. The Acolyte manages to be neither of these things, with the possible exception of the most cringy aspect of it definitely becoming a meme, which is the famous "the power of one, the power of two, the power of many" shtick. Which again, it's not because there shouldn't be witches in Star Wars, because there should be. The Night Sisters have existed for a jolly long time, and Sith sorcery existed for a jolly long time even before they showed up. The issue is that when the Night Sisters engaged in quasi-shamanic chanting and did their cool quasi-voodoo nonsense within the Force, it was treated seriously, and it was fucking cool. The power of one, the power of two, the power of many scene, on the other hand, was nothing but unadulterated Feminism 101 type cringe performance art that didn't even come with interesting visual effects. Because again, for all the faults of the Night Sisters, when they do their cool witchy chanting nonsense, it actually affects the magical e-core that they use that makes them distinct Force users from both the Sith and the Jedi, and it actually looks visually interesting and compelling and eldritch and cool. When the thread users of Bardock use their powers, nothing visually happens whatsoever. Again, it just looks like lame-ass New Age Gender Studies 101 performance art nonsense. And the performances don't help either, because they also come across as gender studies graduates' first attempt to performatively evoke witchcraft symbolism. And it's lame. So it's not just that they're witches, it's that they're witches who are apparently, at least compared to the Night Sisters and the other witches of Dathomir, powerless, lame, and uninteresting. Not to mention cringe. Moving on. Brainstormer. Did we lose you again?
Sorry, I muted myself. I didn't want to make noise while you were talking.
Okay.
No, I am not going to entertain a debate that this is not review bombing. A 15% score is barely more than a third of the last most controversial Disney Star Wars project, The Last Jedi. Nothing is even close except that holiday special. On IMDb, it's even easier to see. A full 54% of all reviews are 1 star, giving it a 3.6 out of 10.
Okay, sweetie. That attitude right there, that I will not entertain a debate on this, is right at the center of the Venn diagram, which is defining the problem, my dear. Because that attitude, that elitist, pompous, I'm more moral than you, I'm better than you, I'm more educated than you, and therefore your opinion is derp, is the problem. Because rather than engage with the substance of the arguments you're being presented with, you just pull rank and morally grandstand instead. Because you genuinely seem to view the lion's share of the audience as morally beneath you and or subhuman in some way. And that attitude is quintessentially the problem with modern pop culture in general. That movement from the customer is always right to the customer is not just wrong but immoral, that thing I was talking about earlier, what you just said is basically the Ivy Tower or Ivory Tower version of that I just described. And that attitude of, I'm not even going to engage with you because I'm an aristocrat and you are a mere peasant, tut tut, is the fucking problem. And only when you get the fuck over yourself and deflate your ego and realize that you're just a motherfucker just like every other motherfucker will this ever get any better. Because all you're doing is morally grandstanding, demonizing your interlocutors, and using it as an excuse to engage in more and more low trust society shenanigans by assuming there are Nazis and fascists and communists and demons around every corner who are subhuman and not even worth your time to discuss with. Moving on.
There's also how fast this happened. First For instance, Ahsoka only has 50,000 reviews in on Rotten Tomatoes after being out for months, while The Acolyte has aired 3 episodes in 2 weeks and has 10,000 reviews in. The last season of The Mandalorian only has 2,500 reviews in. The beloved Andor, 15,000 reviews total years later.
The difference, my dear, is that The Acolyte was in fact so bad in the 3 episodes that it had that it lit a fire under people's asses. It was so bad that its badness actually swung around, the pendulum of bad swung around again and made it so bad and landed it in so bad it's novel territory. And when something is that bad, when something is so bad that it is novel, that it is mimetic, that it is able to catch fire under people's ass, people feel more motivated to engage with it. And when they engage with something that's that bad, they're going to end up reviewing it negatively en masse. Because again, the thing that went the most viral of The Acolyte so far was that the power of one, the power of two, the power of many scene that frankly is distilled feminist performance art cringe. Moving on.
Okay, moving on.
Yes.
Alright. Rotten Tomatoes has previously tried to curb review bombing. Tried to curb review bombing in the wake of what happened with Captain Marvel's release, verifying people had watched the movie before reviewing, but there has been no way to enforce such a system with TV, so here we are. Why is this happening? There are a bunch of dimensions to this, and none of them good. There is absolutely a racial and gender component to this. A clip from star Amanda Sternberg about making white people cry was shared tens of thousands of times online, taken out of context from an interview years earlier about her film The Hate U Give. Showrunner Leslie Headland.
Sorry.
Showrunner Leslie Headland has starred in many YouTube thumbnails lambasting the woke nature of the series, but also it allegedly breaking canon. Again, I'm not going to hold Leslie Headland responsible for that, to be honest.
From what we've actually seen of her own words, she does genuinely seem like a Star Wars fan who was just an inexperienced enough writer to take Kathleen Kennedy's advice on board. And Kathleen Kennedy, as is usually the case, revealed herself to be Darth Kennedy as the incompetent, and ruins everything she touches. But okay, no, there is in fact no racial or gender issue here. What the issue here is an ideological one, a obsession with academicizing demographics one. And by the way, they wouldn't have had that clip of the writer wanting to make white people cry if she didn't say it. Because regardless of whatever context there may have been, how did she not think that that would sound wrong or sound bad to people who are sensitive about being demonized for being white? Which is a thing that happens for ideological reasons, because to a quite staggering amount of social justice adherents, white is almost entirely synonymous with oppressor, or synonymous with everything bad that the West has ever done, or synonymous with colonialism and imperialism and slavery, and basically all the evils of the last 500 years are all woven into white, according to a lot of these people. And maybe there's some context in the movie that they took the clip from. Maybe, okay, fine. but on some level, according to her, she made a movie to make white people cry, which is not typically something you do unless you hate those people. You don't make something specifically to either enrage someone or to make them sad unless you have something against them, generally. Especially when it's a large scale demographic like that. As if all white people are part of some identitarian hive mind or some shit. That kind of collective guilt is something that we project onto those that we hate. And only those that we hate. You don't project that kind of collective guilt on people you admire or people you like or people you want to share the world with. Moving on.
All right. This is the main reason for the surge since episode 3 aired, where fans in air quotes, believe the show has broken canon or destroyed the lore of Anakin Skywalker by implying that, like Anakin, the twins are a virgin Force birth. Anakin was conceived purely through the Force alone, part of his chosen one mythology, and now they say that's happened again, ruining everything.
Well, okay. One, in the original canon, it was very, very specifically and very, very directly implied that the Force didn't make Anakin just out of the fucking blue. It's very, very heavily implied in the original canon that what made Anakin was the meddling with the midi-chlorians done by Darth Plagueis. That effectively, in a roundabout way, Darth Plagueis was actually Anakin's father by manipulating the Force to create him in the first place, in the womb of Skywalker, of course. Secondly, in the event that the Acolyte's world building was well crafted and its characters were likable, I don't think people would have had a problem with a group of witches using Force magic to essentially create a Force-based test tube baby, so to speak, or two of them. What people have an issue with is because the mechanics of how they did it were not fully explained or gone into, and the world building of the Acolyte, not to mention the characters, are profoundly unlikable and profoundly half-baked. There's only so much they can do to fill in the gaps because the show didn't bother to do it for them. And since it didn't bother to do it for them, their only other point of reference is what Plagueis did to create Anakin. And being as Anakin was the chosen one because of what Plagueis did, it does rather cheapen what made Anakin special if 100 years prior to the events of Phantom Menace, a group of witches had already unlocked the secret of generating life with the Force. Now, you could resolve this by saying that this is a new discovery of theirs, or that this is a piece of lost knowledge that Plagueis would then later rediscover. But the thing is, the Acolyte is also, rather painfully, not concerned with where it fits in the overall timeline. And because it's not really concerned with where it fits in the overall timeline, it doesn't bother to say things like, Plagueis would later rediscover this technique and then use that to create Anakin or something. Even though that would have been child play to throw in there, and it would have made the canon not break. But so far, the world building is shit. The technique is basically pulled out of the show's ass because neither the faction that uses it nor how they used it is particularly set up.
Hey, Dalton?
Yeah.
The problem is we simply have no idea if that's true, even if that's what everyone is assuming after last week. Specifically, while they say the girls have no father, it is implied that their mother did something unnatural to create them, which would not be a spontaneous simultaneous Force baby situation. Darkseid meddling, witch magic, cloning. We simply don't know yet. But that has not stopped fans from leaping to conclusions and saying that in 3.5-hour episodes, the series has destroyed 50 years of canon.
Well, again, here's the problem. Anakin wasn't just created out of nothing either. Again, in the original expanded universe canon, it was heavily implied that Anakin's immaculate conception was the result of Plagueis meddling or Sidious meddling with the Force to create a baby in the womb of Shmi Skywalker, to essentially make the perfect warrior for their Rule of Two based plan. So even that aspect is not new to the twins. Both they and Anakin became what they became, at least implied, relating to something that the dark side did. And again, this isn't even something that comes wholly out of thin air because, again, had they been smart enough to use a pre-established piece of the canon, the Night Sisters, or one of the other witches of Dathomir, to do this, they have powers using magical ichor, which is native to Dathomir, that neither the Jedi nor the Sith have. And so there would have been some level of plausibility to them doing something like this. But this is an entirely new faction that you haven't set up any lore for, and so it really does feel like the entire show and this entire new faction is nothing but an ass pull to tie these twins in some haphazard narrative way to Anakin. It is stupid. Also, a large part of what made episode 3 go wrong isn't just the canon breaking thing, it's also, once again, the cringe making nature of the witches' rituals, which, unlike the Night Sister rituals, are the very essence of cringe.
All right, moving on.
Moving on.
There's also pushback about the portrayal of the Jedi as not great, acting as space cops rounding up Force-sensitive kids to test and train, not by abducting them per se, but, luring them away from their families for their own good, which is what happened to Osha, and sparked the events that led to the death of her family and community. Of course, the concept of the Jedis as rulers has dealt with this topic many times over the years, most famously in the prequels, where the arrogant, clueless Jedi Council's actions, or lack thereof, directly led to the Imperial takeover of the galaxy.
Here's the difference. In the prequel era, the incompetence of the Jedi was framed as well-meaning but dilapidated incompetence in a fall of Rome type situation. In the Disney Wars era, and this isn't unique to the Acolyte, by the way, but in general, in the Disney Wars era, the storytelling has shifted in such a way that the Jedi are not a great and noble but occasionally misguided series of space monk wizards. In the Disney Wars era, a lot of work has been done to show that the Jedi and the Sith are both equally stupid and equally bad. Now, the old canon did this to some degree because both the Jedi and the Sith are stupid for only focusing on one aspect of the Force, and that was always implied even in the prequel era. But explicitly now, much of what especially Rian Johnson did with The Last Jedi, and what Disney Wars likes to do in general, is tear down the legacy of the Jedi and say that the Jedi are in fact in some ways worse than the nominal bad guys of the setting. It's basically taking the balance is good, or even a good versus evil type thing, which Star Wars leaned into both of those originally, and going, no, straight up, the people you thought were good were actually evil, lol. Because literally postmodern deconstruction in the form of Rian Johnson, which Kathleen Kennedy has not done anything but doubled down on over and over and over again. And when you frame the heroic good guys, or at least the once great faction in the setting, as either equally as bad or worse than the literally rage-filled evil dudes, then it becomes very obvious that you want to tear down the legacy of the Jedi, which is very similar to tearing down the legacy of Star Wars in general, because the Jedi have always been the main characters of Star Wars to some degree or other.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
The 15% score is embarrassing, not for the show, but for those review bombing it to a frankly laughable degree. I'm not even the Acolyte's biggest fan, as the first 2 episodes I didn't love, though I thought episode 3 was more interesting. But the worst Star Wars project by an order of magnitude in the history of the series, and it just so happens to be one mostly starring black women. This whole situation is a parody of the modern toxic fan base of the series. And if you want to disguise it by being upset about canon, then it shows a distinct lack of understand of both the material of the show and the wider universe. Okay, that's you, motherfucker.
Yeah, sweetheart. Like, you use the phrase "if you want to disguise it by caring about canon," as if that isn't the main concern of the people you're bitching about. And here's the thing, my dear, it is. I know you are probably among the social justicely minded who think that all art is a means to an end, or some kind of delivery mechanism for themes or authorial intent. But honestly, very few people outside of like the worst parts of academia actually think that way. Most people care about canon not because of some wider agenda or some deeper political or socio-political or moral fixation, but because they care about the canon, and they care about the world, and they care about the characters, and they care about the world building, and they care about the world they love being three-dimensional. You seem to be unaware of the concept that there are people out there who view art not as a means to an end, but as an end in itself. And you can only think to defend it by defaulting to, oh, you must hate X, Y, or Z demographic. Never mind how many black women, I'm sure, who are also Star Wars fans, who hate the goddamn Acolyte, and hate it even worse because it's pandering to them, or trying to pander to them lazily. Because that's the thing. We both, Brainstormer and I both, come from marginalized backgrounds, so to speak. And I don't feel represented by the Acolyte. I don't feel represented by any of the nonsense that the Disney Wars era has really spun for the most part, with the possible exception of Andor or Rogue One, which were okay. I did actually at one point feel represented by the Night Sisters, because I'm a practicing occultist who loves seeing magic in pretty much every piece of fiction I can get my hands on. And they were cool, and they were imposing, and Mother Talzin as a character is probably third in terms of the raw power that she wields in all of Star Wars, behind Sidious and Yoda in her era. So, like, I did used to feel actually somewhat represented by certain aspects of Star Wars, even the witchy, magical bullshit parts of Star Wars that a lot of people, for some other reason, don't like. But I don't feel represented by these fucks, because these fucks are very obviously a stand-in for feminist performance artists and not well-rounded characters with their own world or world building. And in the process, Star Wars once again gets deconstructed again. And that seems to be the only thing that the Disney Wars era is capable of doing, is constantly deconstructing or subverting pre-established canon or pre-established writing dynamics. And there's only so much of that people can be expected to put up with if they care about the IP as unironically as a lot of people do. For most people, it's not a means to an end. It's an end in itself. And you keep fucking with it in the name of weaponizing it.
Don,
Moving on. Yeah.
you can critique a show, sure, but overwhelmingly, that is just not what's happening here, and it goes well beyond that. While we have seen many things like this happen with Star Wars fandom over the years, I can't help but feel like it's absolutely getting worse.
You can't have it both ways, my dear. You can't simultaneously permit people to criticize it and then demand also to be the one who arbitrates what is and isn't genuine criticism.
The author's a
People,
dude.
oh, he writes like a fucking woman. I don't care. Um, but in all seriousness, but in all seriousness, you can't simultaneously permit people to criticize something and then tone police the criticism they inevitably give. Just because you don't like a piece of criticism does not make it ungenuine or immoral or invalid in some way. If you wanted to make the case that some of the criticism is unwarranted, you could have done that by arguing the case, by actually addressing the arguments or addressing examples of the criticism you think is invalid. You didn't do that though. You concocted projected conspiracies about it, and then you morally grandstanded about it. You didn't actually address any of the substance of the argument at all. And when you don't address the substance of the argument, but instead try to address the moral validity of the argument, that is the moment when you can be told to fuck off. Because nobody gives a shit about your definition of moral validity because you're not the arbiter of moral redemption, god damn it. Moving on.
Right. Okay. Hello, Chrononaut. The best meme ever. If the Force got women pregnant, that means the Force is male.
Or the Force can be both male and female because it has both dark and light aspects to it in the yin and yang. This is the thing that even some Star Wars fans get wrong. Star Wars is not a story about good and evil. Star Wars is a story about balance, balance in the Force, balance between light and dark. The end win state of Star Wars is not the dark side is entirely vanquished and the light side is all that remains. The end state of Star Wars is the dark side and the light side existing in a kind of Eastern equilibrium because it was Eastern mysticism and Eastern philosophy that inspired the concept of the Force in George Lucas's mind in the first goddamn place. Moving on.
All right. This last thing I wanted to cover, just because it came out, the official teaser trailer, like the second one for Penguin, which is part of the Batman continuity.
Mhm.
Which is cool because it's going to cover some stuff. Because to me, it does feel like Penguin might not be be a bigger villain, obviously, in like the movies.
I'm sure, given all the setup they're doing for him, he's going to come back later.
No, I do. I do that. I do think he's going to come back. I'm just saying, like, I don't think he's going to be a mainstay. I think he'll be a part of it, but he's not. He's not going to take like the major antagonist role. Is what I'm saying.
Probably not. Although honestly, he wouldn't be a bad choice for the villain of Batman 2 if they wanted him to be.
Secondary, maybe I would say.
I still think they should probably save the Joker for the third one because for the foreseeable future, Joaquin Phoenix is going to be the Joker. And as much as I love Barry Coogan's version, I don't think he can quite compete with Joaquin in people's minds just yet.
All right. Batnana.
Batnana.
Look at this. what that madman did.
It all looks still pretty good. I'll be honest. Given that it was a series, I was a little worried that they were going to skimp on the funding for it, like the budget. But no,
Right.
it looks good.
Yeah, they seem to have put at least enough money in it that it can have a similar aesthetic to the movie it's based on. My
Well,
main
yeah, I
hope for
mean, like
this my main hope for this is Penguin getting his trick umbrellas at some point.
I remember seeing like a behind the scenes thing. They actually did have him in like a tux and top hat. So
Yeah, but the trick umbrellas are the important bit. The trick umbrellas haven't been referenced since Tim Burton's second Batman movie, and that is way too freaking long if you're gonna use the Penguin.
well, do you mean in live action or
Yeah, in live action in the movies.
okay? I just remember like a lot of Batman cartoons that were coming out.
Well,
Did
yeah,
allow Penguin.
in the cartoons they always do, as well they should. But in terms of a live action adaptation, Tim Burton managed to make the trick umbrellas awesome, and I see no reason why this couldn't also succeed in making the trick umbrellas awesome.
Mhm. Anyway, shall we?
Yep, Batnana.
Batman.
Listen, Sal, Carmine Falcone's dead. And I'm here now. I'll be calling the shots. The Falcons are still licking their wounds. They're distracted. The business will be right.
Sal Marone is being played by Clancy Brown.
Oh hey Luthor, it's nice seeing you here. Lol.
Yeah. I remember someone saying this kind of gave off like Sopranos vibes, or like
A bit, yeah. It
Ma-
is. It
yeah,
is. Yeah, it's definitely giving Sopranos or
or like
Godfather.
yeah, mafia type. Which I mean, Penguin is like the elevated supervillain mobster of
Yeah,
Gotham. in the
it's
Batman
not quite
mythos.
fun enough to go full Goodfellas, but yeah, it's definitely giving Sopranos vibes at least.
Shall we?
Yep, Batman.
Batman.
Hit for the taking.
My father's been dead a week. You want to take what's mine?
I'm the daughter of the Falcone Don. But he's dead. The family thinks I'm broken. I'm not broken.
Are they setting up Huntress? They seem to be setting up Huntress.
No, that's Bertinelli, not Falcone. Although
They could easily switch it. Is what I was thinking.
well, to be fair, the Huntress that is tied with Batman is more so Helena Wayne, which is the child of Selena Kyle and Bruce Wayne. So,
I know,
and
but
Matt Reeves is a bit, doing that whole thing of not wanting the Batman to be a part of like the grander thing.
we're tentatively isolating it, even though DC desperately needs a unifying front.
Yeah. So if they were gonna do Huntress, it wouldn't be Bertinelli.
Yeah. Okay. It very much seemed like that was where they were going with her, and then my brain was like, wouldn't it be cool if this set up a larger universe a little bit? But of course, Matt Reeves doesn't want to do a freaking broader universe. Meh.
Even though he literally gave the best. Oh, you're good, Giant. Even though he literally created the best like foundation for a DC universe.
Yeah, and it's like Warner Brothers. I don't care if he originally wanted it to be a standalone. Fucking bribe him. How many dump trucks worth of money does it take?
I
Guy's
mean,
gotta have a price somewhere.
he's literally building, like, he has plans to build out this whole, to flesh out the mythos of his Batman, like with a few series and other movies. Why
Which
the
is
fuck
good
can't,
and correct, and how you build the universe. But
no,
it should
why,
extend to the whole rest of the universe, God damn it.
again, we've talked about that before. It's a bit stupid, but I still respect the universe he's creating at least.
I
I
do.
wish
I
it was.
just wish that I wish that Warner Brothers would get off their ass and figure out how many dump trucks worth of money it's going to take for him to loosen his isolation restrictions a little bit here.
But
Anyway, that now.
yeah, I think this is just like a war between the crime. Hold on. I legitimately think it's just a war between the crime families, like the remaining ones, because this is okay. If it's based in year 2, which is obviously a major inspiration for the Batman movie, was Long Halloween, which was which was obviously showing the juxtaposition of the classic, like, crime noir city that was Gotham, that metamorphosizes into the Gotham that most fans are aware of, that is populated by the costumed criminals, and you know the the city metamorphosizes into that whole Gotham becomes Gotham. What I mean, like, more fantastical, more outlandish, more crazy.
Mm-hmm. In answer to your questions, Dragon Turtle, yes, the Grey Jedi are more enlightened, quote unquote, than all the rest of the Jedi and Sith, and this is another one of those cool things about the Night Sisters and the Witches of Dathomir in general. The Night Sisters' magic is ostensibly rooted in the dark side, but the way that the Night Sisters use their magic is balanced between dark and light, which is why you don't get the Sith rot in the Night Sisters like you do in the Sith, because they actually work with the dark side in a passive enough and indirect enough way that they can actually find a balance in the dark and the light. And originally in the EU canon, I don't know if it's canon anymore, but in the EU canon, the proto organization that is the root of both the Jedi and the Sith, called the Jedi, were a group of Force users who were balanced in the Force. And the origin story of the Jedi and the Sith are two factions of Jedi who for some reason decided that they were going to hyper specialize in one side and the other, and then started arguing about it.
Okay. Again, guys, I hate doing this, but for actual legitimate reasons, I do kind of have to stop you before you guys go on a full-on, like, discussion tangent.
Because Brainstormer needs sleep before he has to work tomorrow, because
I
the
work
only shift
first.
that was available was the fuck you shift. So,
Yeah, first shift. So, don't worry. That is going to change. Not the job more so, but the time and stuff. Again, it'll be explained and stuff, and due time.
but Bat Nana.
Anyway, shall we?
Yeah, Bat Nana.
You and me, kid. We gotta take whatever we decide is ours. 'Cause no one's gonna give it to us. I'm not without a fight.
Penguin, you work for the family. You will do as you're told.
I refuse to let these old men push me aside.
Yeah, this all looks really cool, and I do like how it is taking place like immediate. I don't know if immediately, but sometime after the Batman, obviously, and like we're seeing the more repercussions and the consequences of what happened. Because, like, full honesty, never really get to see that in a lot of superhero media recently.
Yeah, I know they changed shit in the new canon Dragon Turtle, but I'm always partial to the old canon because the old canon understood that the whole premise was that the Jedi and Sith were both stupid for being out of balance, but that's neither here nor there.
Okay. Again, if you guys want to have a discussion later, I would recommend that you discuss it
Yeah.
somewhere
Anyway,
else. Just again, it's
Batman.
not. I'm not trying to be an asshole. I just legitimately have to go to bed with like within the hour or so. So
Yeah. So Batman.
Batman.
Fight again. So I'm gonna take from them now. And I'm gonna force them to their knees.
What is it you're really after, Oz?
I'm gonna tear down the Empire from the inside out.
You know, Oz, people underestimate me, but not me.
It is nice that Clancy Brown is getting work again. Because
I think he's done a lot of voice work. Live action stuff is.
I remember seeing him in John Wick 4 as one of the adjudicators, and he was really good in that.
No, he was an adjudicator. He was a harbinger.
Well, harbinger, but yeah, he was in John Wick 4, and it was nice seeing him there.
Yeah. No, you're good, Drantrell. It's just, don't get me wrong. I would love to hear you guys' discussions because they're always interesting and entertaining. I just, again, it's just a time thing for me right now.
He needs sleep because he has the fuck you shift.
I have to get up at 5 so I can get to work at 6:30.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, Batnana.
Yeah.
I've always known you were capable of more.
September.
No, Chrono. Clancy Brown is still alive and kicking. But as I'm sure he would remind us, not even the greatest of us can compete with time. Lol.
All right. So with that, folks, I want to say goodbye, adios, aloha, avideze, sayonara, peace, cheers, and
Shalom and fuck off. Brainstorming needs sleep.